Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. Lots of interesting stories this morning. We have a blowback on Capitol Hill from Republicans about that release of January 6 tapes on Tucker Carlson's show. We also have some new text messages. Tucker explaining exactly how he feels about Donald Trump in reality, very different from the picture he puts forward on his show. So we'll break that down for you. New budget battles as the debt ceiling deadline comes closer and closer. Biden putting out his budget plans, House Republicans starting to coalesce around their package of cuts that they are trying to demand. So we've got all of that for you. We also have new shots fired between Elon Musk at Twitter and the FTC. They are demanding all sorts of information, including the journalists and information about the journalists he interacted with and what exactly they had access to. Noam Chomsky out with a new op-ed warning about AI and ChatGPT. And we also have a look at the House hearings on COVID and what was said there. But Saagar, first, we have a big announcement.
Big announcement here that we have been working on for literally years now at this point. So we will now have the full show video with timestamps on our Spotify Premium podcast. So what that means is our premium subscribers who have connected the full show, their ability to watch it to their Spotify account, you no longer can just listen to it. You can also watch it inside of the Spotify app as you can with many podcasts. So we've been working on that for a long time. Technologically, it's far more difficult than it might sound to actually pull off. Thank you to our friends over at Supercast, at Spotify, and to our team here who has been ground testing it. It looks fantastic. It works fantastic. Yeah. So enjoy. And now you can also listen at 3.5 speed.
Yes,
like
indeed. You can listen at whatever speed you desire. And it looks, I have to say, it looks really great.
Yeah, it looks really nice on the phone.
And Griffin was just showing us this morning, it actually has like the time codes. So you can easily sort of jump around. And if there are certain segments you want to listen to and other things you want to skip past, it makes it easy to do that. So really excited about that. If you aren't a premium subscriber, go ahead and become one so that you can have access to that as well, because it is a very cool feature.
It's an awesome thing. All right, let's start with Fox News. So we have been covering quite a bit here. I know Emily did as well, the release of the Tucker Carlson footage from January 6th. It's actually kicked up quite a storm here in Washington. A lot of GOP senators actually getting very upset with Fox and Tucker specifically editorial coverage of that, all converging around the singular idea that the Capitol Police did nothing wrong on January 6th. Mitch McConnell underscoring that. Let's take a listen.
By Speaker McCarthy to give access to Tucker Carlson of this security footage?
My concern is how it was depicted, which is a different issue. Clearly, the chief of the Capitol Police, in my view, correctly describes what most of us witnessed firsthand on January 6th. So that's my reaction to it. It was a mistake, in my view, for Fox News to depict this in a way that's completely at variance with what our chief law enforcement official here at the Capitol thinks.
This is the interesting thing, Krystal. Everybody's converging around the Capitol Police as if they didn't do anything particularly wrong that day. So let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. The Capitol Police chief letter, I'll read some of it to you in full. He says, quote, "A false allegation is that our officers helped the rioters and acted as, quote, tour guides. This is outrageous and false. The department stands by the officers in the video that was shown last night. I don't have to remind you how outnumbered our officers were on January 6th. Those officers did their best to use de-escalation tactics to try to talk to rioters into getting each other to leave the building. The program conveniently cherry-picked from the calmer moments of the 41,000 hours of the video, and commentary fails to provide context about the chaos and violence." So let's all just have a little bit of a reminder of what exactly that footage showed. It showed Capitol Police officers effectively escorting and just following around the QAnon shaman. And look, Krystal, I think we can sympathize with people who may want to, quote, de-escalate a conflict. That's certainly what I would advise, as opposed to violence when you are outnumbered. But there is a fine line between de-escalation and straight up opening doors for someone, including to the floor of the United States Senate. That is where I just really have no idea how they can defend the conduct of these officers. For, you could say, hey, one thing, listen, man, it would be better for you if you just left right now. That's one thing. But But there's a whole other thing to literally basically follow somebody around, 7 people at one point, one person, a crazy person with like a weird sharpened spear. Why would you want to let that person onto the floor of the Senate?
Right.
And then while they're like, hey, just so you know, like this is a really holy place. And you know, it was like, what? That's not de-escalate. That's just odd. It's odd behavior.
Very odd behavior. If I may be permitted to have a nuanced view on this, there's 2 pieces. First of all, you know, a lot of what Tucker showed was like trying to cherry pick the calmest moments from January 6th and present a portrait that is at odds with reality. And so I sympathize with Republican senators and others who are like, this is bullshit. We all saw with our own eyes that parts of this day were extremely violent. A lot of people were injured. There were a lot of scuffles. There was a lot of fighting, all of that stuff. So, you know, don't give us just your sanitized, propaganda-filled version that accords with the narrative that you have been trying to spin on your program, which, by the way, we'll get to in a moment. You know, he clearly is happy to put lies out on his program that are wildly at odds with what he believes with. So that's one piece. The piece, though, that you're honing in on, though, I think the explanation of the Capitol Police here, it just makes absolutely no sense.
Like,
I mean, any de-escalatory tactic. You're leading him around. You're trying locked doors, like helping him to find the chamber that he was. How is that a de-escalatory tactic? How is that like trying to talk him out of doing? There is none of that evident on the tape. And right in the wake of January 6th, there was a lot of, I think, very reasonable questions about how the hell this was allowed to happen, about failures of law enforcement on that day, including, by the way, there were media questions, there were political questions, I believe, from both sides of the aisle, and there was an entire investigation done by the Capitol Police where they put some of their own people on leave because they did not conduct themselves in the way that they would want them to on that day. So even the Capitol Police previously did not agree with this assessment that it was all well and good on that day. And we'll get to some of that in a moment. Let's just put this next piece up on the screen because this is the part I'm sympathetic to. They say GOP senators rebuke Tucker Carlson's narrative that January 6th was largely peaceful. Tillis said it's bullshit. Kramer said just a lie. Graham said I'm not interested in whitewashing January 6th. And Romney said trying to normalize that behavior is dangerous and disgusting. And those pieces I actually am totally sympathetic to because I do think he overall presented this very like selective whitewash version of what actually occurred on that day.
And I think that's fine. But what I was saying was that this is what I put out yesterday. The tell to me in the freak out is that everyone is attacking the editorial position instead of trying to explain the actions of the Capitol Police in escorting the QAnon shaman around the Capitol.
Right.
And it's like, you can, listen, by definition, all editorial coverage of January 6th by any news network is going to be editorial. It is going to be cherry-picked. The Washington Post literally won a Pulitzer Prize by, quote, cherry-picking the video to be like reconstructing the attack. So did the New York Times. They have these highly produced documentaries. And I think that's fine. So at this point now, it's been over, it's been several years. You can, at this point, you can watch any footage to reinforce any narrative that you want to. On this one, let's take the editorial aside and let's take the footage that we had not seen before and just say, hey, that's pretty weird. What was going on with that? And for some reason, there is just been coalescing around the actions of the Capitol Police. When in reality, as you said, in the early days, there was broad recognition that this was a failure of tremendous proportions. Like, I saw a Joe Biden staffer or whatever put out a tweet yesterday being like, in my opinion, January 6th was just as bad as 9/11. Let's think about 9/11. Imagine if we did not have the takeaway that the FBI and the CIA had colossally failed at their jobs by allowing 9/11 to happen. You can both venerate first responders,
yes,
and the violence and the victims, and also say, hey, structurally, this was a massive screw up. Now, unfortunately, we didn't go full bore in terms of the intelligence community, but in this case, in the very early days, put this up there on the screen, as you alluded to, the Capitol Police suspended 6 of its officers and investigated dozens more after the Capitol riots. And as this New York Times report is highlighting, there were several efforts after in the days to talk about how the force was in crisis, about how at one point the gear that they needed, Krystal, was literally on a bus that was somewhere that was locked. They didn't have a rapid response plan. It was one of the greatest intelligence failures of all time. And I think that's why so many people are willing to believe a lot of theories that this was like a full-blown false flag, because you're like, hey, you guys literally had FBI informants planted in the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, probably in the crowd. At the very least, we know there were some there were some undercover police officers that have been come out and given affidavits in court. How could you possibly not know and have given the Capitol Police a heads up? Secondary, like, why was there an order given to the Capitol Police to not necessarily use the full scope of law enforcement response?
Yeah.
And the National Guard, why was the National Guard not on call? Why were they called in, hours later? It was a complete and total mess. Initially, there were actually some questions about this.
Yeah.
But then eventually it all came down to, well, they were heroes. You can't question anything. And oh, by the way, let's give them a ton more money in funding.
I mean, the most likely explanation for the failures is incompetence. That's usually the common explanation for things that we have trouble understanding or explaining. I think they just failed in a lot of ways. They failed to prepare. And I'm not just talking about the U.S. Capitol Police here, who are responsible for the response on that day, but I'm talking about, law enforcement, FBI, leading up to the events of this day, when there was all kinds of intel out there and public chatter about what they were planning to do on January 6th. I think a very logical explanation is, listen, it's no secret that law enforcement tends to be more right-leaning, and they were more sympathetic to the cause. And so they, in their own minds, downplayed the potential risks of what could happen on January 6th. And, there were a couple signs of that. First of all, as we said before, there were, and we'll play this in just a second, right afterwards, videos emerged of some of the Capitol Police officers literally appearing to open the barricades for protesters to go through, which fits then with this video of them shepherding the QAnon shaman around and showing him exactly where he wants to go. One potential explanation is they were ideologically sympathetic, and that was a barrier to them effectively doing their job in the way that we would want them to. And there was actually even one Capitol Police officer, put this up on the screen, who was found guilty of obstruction with regards to January 6th case. Basically, what this guy was doing is the day after the attack, I'm reading from this article here, a Facebook friend of this former Capitol Police officer with whom he'd never exchanged messages before posted some images on Facebook of himself inside the Capitol during the attack. So he took it on himself, this dude, then to message this guy who he'd never talked to before, but he was friends with on Facebook. And rather than forwarding that information to the authorities, which you might expect someone in law enforcement to do, he instead sent the rioter a private message with advice about how to avoid being caught. He said, quote, "I'm a Capitol Police officer who agrees with your political stance. Take down the part about being in the building they're currently investigating, and everyone who was in the building is going to be charged," he wrote, "just looking out." So, there are plenty of signs that potentially one explanation here is that they were ideologically sympathetic, and so they failed to prepare in advance, not just the Capitol Police, but the FBI, who we know had infiltrators within some of these groups. They didn't take it seriously. They were too distracted with their other elaborate designing plots for Gretchen Whitmer and the agent provocateurs and Black Lives Matter protests and all of those things to actually effectively prepare for what was a very dangerous situation. And then on the day of, as we said before, at the time, people were allowed, and the Capitol Police themselves were investigating whether their people actually responded in the way that they were supposed to. Now, the reason that this all turned is because I think there were a couple things that happened. First of all, this was at a time when Democrats were all freaked out about what defund the police had done to their standing with voters. So they were skittish about critiquing law enforcement whatsoever. Mm-hmm. Republicans usually reliably back up law enforcement kind of no matter what, no matter whether they were good, bad, indifferent, honest, lying, whatever. And Democrats decided that the simple narrative that they wanted to go with on January 6th, because they thought it would be the most sympathetic to the American public, is these people were heroes, the Capitol Police officers in every single instance, and the people on the other side are the clear villains. And so they went with that Disney version of events, which obviously obscured some key reasons why the response failed so devastatingly on that day.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important thing to underscore, which is what's his name? Eugene Goodman, right? He was one of those who escorted the senators. Sure, absolutely a heroic act. But at the same time, The famous video, let's go ahead and put it up there on the screen. We have Capitol Police officers here literally shown opening the gates for protesters. I mean, there is literally no zero innocent explanation for this. You could see the guy waving people in from the crowd. How can you possibly claim that that wasn't one of the greatest failures of all? I mean, imagine also if these people had been more violent. They could have burned this thing to the ground like 1812. It's one of those where you initially had a little bit of criticism. Some Republicans were like, hey, Nancy Pelosi, why did you not call in the National Guard? Because you apparently had some level of chain of command. And then everybody just quashed it and we decided to move on. And then the Jan 6 committee, which was supposed to get to the bottom of this type of stuff, just ignored it completely.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Saagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.